Good evening, everybody, and welcome to For Future Generations, Episode 6. It is the 2nd of March, 2025. Hope you're having a wonderful, holy day. We have a very special show today. Got a very interesting topic to talk about. Um, you know, a lot of things being released right now. Hopefully, that will shed some light on some things that happened years and years before I was even born, and Sean as well. We're from a completely different generation, and yet these things that happened so many years ago have shaped the lives that we have lived, have shaped the world in which we've grown up. But without any more ado, Sean, please introduce your guest. I understand this is a personal friend of yours.
Yes, Bruce Engelman is the pastor emeritus of Triumph Baptist Church in Fort Worth. He is the chaplain of my Sons of Confederate Veterans Camp, R.E. Lee Camp 239 in Fort Worth, and he is the author of Eternal Flame, The Story of Kennedy, Conspiracy, and Christianity in Dallas. And he will be coming out with a sequel to that book. I'll let him talk about that. Please welcome Bruce Engelman.
All right. Well, thank you, sir. Thank you for coming on. We're glad to have you.
Honored to be here.
First off, if you could just give us a quick blurb about your book and your upcoming book, I understand.
Yes, the book came out actually a number of years ago, entitled Eternal Flame, after the torch that is on Kennedy's grave. And we're going to name the sequel Eternal Frame because there are some of us in the research community that think Oswald was framed. So a little play on words there.
And, so it says, you're holding up a button here. It says Lee Harvey Oswald didn't kill JFK. He died trying to save him. So not only do you take the position that he didn't shoot JFK, but in fact, he was on the other side. He was trying to reveal a conspiracy, and then he was made into the patsy.
Correct. And we can go into that at length in further in the interview. Yes, right. Exactly. Well framed, well said.
All right. Well, with that being said, what I want to do is all right, so first off, to the audience, this is going to involve talking about a guy getting his head blown off. And we will be showing pictures and video of a guy getting his head blown off and a guy with his head with a big hole in the back of it. If you are squeamish or if you're around kids, perhaps you might want to, put this one running on in the background or, pause it a lot and come back to it, or maybe just avert your eyes from the screen for a second. If you're listening to this as a podcast, it shouldn't be a problem. We're not going to be too graphic, but there are some photographs that we will be showing that are not going to be fun. Okay. So with that said, that's your warning. We don't have to worry about being, unmonetized on YouTube or Rumble or all that, because we're doing this out of a love of it. We are not, as it were, sponsored by those people. But first off, what I want to do is I want to show a picture, and it's a graphic picture of Kennedy after he was shot. This is at the autopsy. And then we're going to show the full Zapruder film, which is to my understanding, the only extant film that we have of the assassination that day. And then I'm going to read an alleged timeline of events according to what is the broadly considered the accepted narrative. And then we'll be talking to Mr. Engelman about what's actually going on at each of those moments. So here is the picture of President Kennedy dead on the autopsy table, his head held up by an apparatus here. You can see the back of his head is completely gone. And there are other holes in his body that one can see. There's a hole in his throat here, and there's a hole in his chest up here. And different people have different things to say about those holes and how they were made by bullets of particularly magical apparatus. But with that being said, this is the Zapruder film in full. So this is the motorcade passing through Dallas on that fateful day. And here we go. So we can see the police motorcycles pulling around. You know, they're going in front of the motorcade. There's a cut. Now we have the motorcade full in front of us, the police cars and motorcycles behind the motorcade. He starts leaning over. Jackie's looking at him. His head explodes. He falls over. She begins to climb out of the car. Secret Service man jumps on the back. She gets down, and then at that point, it begins to speed away. So that is not a fun video to watch. And this is, while it's interesting to talk about things like this, conspiracies, things that have occurred, and it can be fun to speculate, when you watch a video like that and you realize somebody just got killed, somebody who is a leader of a nation who had lives in his hand, people who were depending on him, and he was murdered in broad daylight, that's a heavy thing to consider. All right, so here are the events of the assassination according to the official narrative, beginning in the morning of Friday, November 22nd, 1963. According to Wikipedia, all timestamps Central Standard Time, which is our time zone. We are in Texas. This is our backyard. Events preceding the assassination, 7 a.m. to 11 a.m. At 7:23 a.m., Oswald allegedly goes to work at the Texas School Book Depository in Dallas with Buell Wesley Frazier, a young worker there. Frazier asks about the long paper-wrapped package in Oswald's arms, to which Oswald says that it is curtains. 8:45 a.m., the president speaks before breakfast in a square across 8th Street. The attendees, members of the Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce, largely conservative Republicans. There are a few people to note there, a few whom we will probably bring up later. 9:10 a.m., Kennedy takes his place in the Hotel Texas's Grand Ballroom for a scheduled speech, and afterwards, presidential advisor Kenny O'Donnell informs Roy Kellerman, the Secret Service agent in charge of the trip, that the presidential limousine should not be equipped with its bubble top if the weather is clear in Dallas. Later, the assistant, now ranking press secretary Malcolm Kilduff, shows the Kennedys a narrative advertisement published in the Dallas Morning News with the headline, "Welcome Mr. Kennedy to Dallas." Kennedy tells his wife, "We're heading into nut country today." 10:40 a.m., Kennedy's motorcade departs Hotel Texas for Carswell Air Force Base. The assassination, 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. 11:20 a.m., Air Force One departs Carswell Air Force Base for Dallas, Texas. 11:35 a.m., Air Force Two arrives at Love Field in Dallas. 11:38 a.m., Air Force One arrives at Love Field in Dallas. 11:44 a.m., the Kennedys and Connollys disembark Air Force One and are greeted by the Johnsons. The motorcade cars had been lined up in order earlier that morning. 11:55 a.m., the motorcade departs Love Field about 15 minutes after the party arrived, after the president and his wife take time to shake hands and greet folks. The motorcade route took a left turn from the south end of Love Field to West Mockingbird Lane and continued through central Dallas. It progressed down Main Street. 11:29, motorcade turned right westbound into Houston Street, entering Dealey Plaza. The motorcade approached the Texas School Book Depository. 11:30, motorcade made a sharp 135-degree left turn onto Elm Street, a downward sloping road. The giant Hertz rent-a-car clock on top of the depository building was seen to change from 12:29 to 12:30 as the limousine turned onto Elm Street. Witnesses recalled the first shot was fired after the president had started waving with his right hand. Onlookers recalled hearing 3 shots, allegedly. We'll get to that. The Zapruder film shows the president reemerging after being temporarily hidden from view by the Simmons freeway sign at film frames 215 to 223, which we already saw, and his mouth had already opened wide in an anguished expression by frame 225. He has already been impacted by a bullet that struck him in the back and exited his throat, allegedly. His hands clenched into fists. He then raises his fists in front of his face and throat as he turns to the left toward his wife. Connolly is also hit. Secret Service agent Clint Hill testified he heard one shot, then jumped off the running board of the Secret Service follow-up car directly behind Kennedy at the equivalent of frame 308, about a quarter of a second before the president's head exploded at frame 313. Hill then rapidly ran towards the presidential limo. The 3 shots were fired in a time span estimated to be from 4.8 to 7.9 seconds, and we'll touch on that as well. The Warren Commission report states that seconds after shooting, Roy Kellerman consulted his watch and said 12:30 to William Greer before he radioed to Police Chief Jesse Curry that the president had been shot. Curry then communicated an order for Parkland Hospital to stand by. The Dallas Police radio log reflects that this communication was made at 12:30. As the limousine began to speed up, Mrs. Kennedy was heard to scream. She climbed onto the rear of the limo. At the same time, Hill managed to climb aboard and hang on to the suddenly accelerating limo, which we saw in the Zapruder film. It actually did not begin to accelerate until after that point, and Mrs. Kennedy returned to the back seat. Hill then shielded her and the president, allegedly. The Connollys stated they heard Mrs. Kennedy say, "I have his brains in my hand." The limo driver and police motorcycles turned on their sirens and raced at an estimated 80 miles per hour to Parkland Hospital along Stemmons Freeway and Harry Hines Boulevard, approximately 4 miles away. So, that is, according to the Warren Commission, the official report. Now, there was, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Engelman, another report or another commission that came out with a different report with a different finding. Do you care to speak to that for a minute?
Yes, we're glad to, Jeffrey. The House Select Committee on Assassinations, which was a special committee set up by the federal government, Congress, and Louis Stokes, congressman from Cleveland, Ohio, eventually became the chairman of it. And their final analysis was that there were 2 shooters. Now, this is a government agency. Nobody ever talked about it. It's been long forgotten.
And this is a congressional body, right?
This is a U.S. congressional body, absolutely. And they did a halfway decent job compared to the Warren Commission, which was a fiasco and a total whitewash. As Governor Jesse Ventura told me, it was a myth. The movie JFK was counter myth to the Warren Commission, which was total myth and cover up. So
what is the timeline of these 2 commissions?
Yes, the Warren Commission was put together by President Lyndon Johnson. He asked Earl Warren, a very liberal Supreme Court justice and Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court in 1963, to chair a committee in 1964. This one was about 11 years later in the mid-'70s.
Okay.
So who was, now you mentioned that he was a Chief Justice,
Yes.
but it was said by people at the time that Justice Warren should not have been on that side of the bench, but in fact should have been on the other side being questioned. Do you care to expound on why would people have had that perspective? What was his potential involvement in the assassination, as some people have accused him?
Yes. I've never uncovered, Jeffrey and Sean, any conclusive evidence that he was involved in the actual plotting and planning of the assassination itself. He definitely was placed there as a figurehead by LBJ and J. Edgar Hoover to cover it up. He was a very liberal senator. He had been from California. He was a rhino before the rhinos. And he did a good job of whitewashing. Ironically, President Gerald Ford, at that time a congressman from Michigan, was on the board too. And there was a conglomeration of business leaders, political leaders, a senator, a congressman that were supposed to get to the bottom of the assassination. But from the get-go, they were given a narrative to support that Lee Harvey Oswald, a lone nut gunman, was the single assassin. But this was debunked by the federal government, although they said that Oswald probably was one of the shooters. And there were two shooters. They came to the conclusion that there was a shooter on the grassy knoll after doing all kinds of acoustic and scientific studies. They shut off the traffic.
So from what I understand, there was a development in technology, and when they evaluated the sound that was recorded, I don't remember if it's exactly the sound was recorded by Zapruder or if it was recorded by some other recording device. But the sound, they reevaluated the sound and determined that there were not just 3 shots, but there were at least 6 shots, 6 distinct shots. And if that is the case, then there was not enough time. So you remember in the official report, it was 4 seconds to at the most 7 seconds. And to shoot off 6 bullets in 7 seconds from a Carcano bolt-action rifle would have been, Jerry Mikulek type levels of superhuman behavior. So the Committee on Assassinations determined, based upon that and other evidences, that there was more than one shooter because there were too many bullets, too many shots fired in too little amount of time for it to have been a lone gunman.
Exactly. You're exactly right. And see, the conspirators did not plan on Mr. Abraham Zapruder, who was a dress manufacturer across the street, perpendicular to the Dealey Plaza. They did not plan on a civilian watching the parade being there with his 8mm Bell and Howell camera, because the narrative was, we're going to say there are 3 shots, as you said, in whatever amount of seconds. But there were several problems. Their plans got messed up. Number one, the first shot missed the motorcade. So now we're down to 2 shots. But when the Zapruder film, when they discovered that there was actually a home movie of the assassination, which again, the perpetrators did not plan for. We now have a time
some of them
frame.
didn't.
Right. We now have a time frame of 6.7 seconds, which prompted
on the outside. On the outside, 6.7 seconds, because it could have been as few as 4.
Right, exactly. And here's another thing that nobody ever talks about. I actually met the fella before he passed away. James Tague was a witness that was wounded. And Conley said up until he was...
Mr. Tague, if I remember correctly,
James
was
Tague,
standing in front of the motorcade to one side, and he was not mentioned in this timeline that we have, but according to the official narrative, Mr. Tague was struck by the first bullet. But according to Mr. Tague's own description, he says he heard firing and turned around toward the motorcade and then was struck. So there's a time gap there where the first bullet could not have struck Mr. Tague because he turned toward the motorcade.
Right.
And bullets are not traveling slow enough that they can be bouncing around magically for a couple seconds for a man to turn himself and then be struck.
According to Arlen Specter, the ultra-liberal Republican senator from Pennsylvania, my home state, it did move that slowly, and they called it the magic bullet theory. So now we have 3 victims. Governor Connolly was shot at least twice, according to his own testimony. We know Kennedy was
Governor
shot
Connolly was
times.
sitting in the passenger seat, right, in front of the president.
It was a suicide seat, or it was called a jump seat. It was actually in between.
Okay. So
yeah.
Got you. Okay.
All right. And like you said, we have a bolt-action rifle. And this guy was not Annie Oakley up there, or Wild Buffalo Bill. My grandfather used to work for Wild Buffalo Bill Western show, turn of the century. Oswald was known as a pretty poor shot when he was in Russia by his friends in a rod and gun club. And so we have 3 victims with multiple wounds. We have a shot, and then we have a dictabelt. I actually had dinner with H.B. McLean and his wife. They claim that his radio police radio, two-way radio on his Harley Davidson motorcycle. He was one of the escort police officers. Got jammed, and they used to have a recording at the Dallas police station called the Dicta Belt. Dicta Belt, and
Dicta Belt.
Yes, Dictabelt. It was that trade name, and you can hear four shots, and so now we got at least 4 shots in 6.7 seconds with 3 victims. They didn't plan on any of that.
All right, so so your take on Abraham Zapruder, the dress salesman, is that he was an unaccounted for bystander, because there are several people who point to him and say, man, wasn't it convenient for this man to be standing fortuitously right here and have the clean shot video of the assassination. To me, that does seem very fortuitous in the 1960s. This is primitive technology, but it is, possible. It's not it's not like nobody has video cameras, but the people who have them are hobbyists, right? They're really into it. Not like today where every 12-year-old has an iPhone that they can just pull out and start recording when there's a fight in Walmart.
Right.
So Mr. Zapruder would have somehow heard about the motorcade coming, gotten his equipment, which is not simple, set up, and walked out to a place of vantage where he could see the road where this would have been coming through, and took a video of it. So it does seem very convenient. But your take on that is that there's no reason to believe that Mr. Zapruder was in any way culpable in the activities that were going on, or told to be in a certain place to record a certain thing. That's your assessment of that?
Yes, correct, Jeffrey. In fact, his presence there foiled their narrative. He had vertigo. He couldn't even walk up a set of stairs without tripping. He had terrible vertigo. And so he asked his secretary at the dress manufacturing company across the street, would you come, Marilyn? I'm going to climb up on that colonnade in the park, known as Dealey Plaza, and would you brace my ankles, which she did. And so she was bracing his ankles as the motorcade was coming. So, no, I don't think he was in any way involved in the actual murder and the planning thereof. In fact, his presence there kind of blew their little plot.
Can I take the take the timeline all the way back to that morning? So the morning of November 22nd. He starts in Fort Worth, right? What is the connection with Fort Worth? Because anyone who's been to our downtown will see that we actually have our own JFK Memorial in downtown Fort Worth, and it kind of talks about that a little bit. And so could give us from there, because we were talking before we started recording that he had members of the Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce in attendance with him. What is their connection? So like start us from before he even gets into Dallas.
Yeah. By the way, I was privileged to be there for the ribbon cutting ceremony with Congressman Wright, who was there the day of the assassination, former Speaker of the House. I was actually there when they dedicated that new memorial. And then a friend of mine, JB, he put my wife and I up in the actual suite for our anniversary. We stayed in the actual suite where JFK and Jackie spent their last night. So, and then thirdly, we had a close friend, Johnny Santa Cruz, was in the crowd. You can see his picture when JFK came out in the morning to address the crowd that had assembled. At that time, it was Hotel Fort Worth. Now it's the Hilton. And then Johnny was a teenager who skipped school that day, and he snuck into the kitchen, and Kennedy and Jackie walked right by him. And so, yeah, I'm very familiar with that. It was Hotel Fort Worth, and they were doing a whirlwind tour of Texas. They had been in Houston. They had been in several other cities, Austin, I believe, and San Antonio. And they had come into Carswell the day before the assassination. They spent the night there. The Secret Service went out, except for Clint Hill, and they went out and got drunk and left the president totally unprotected at that hotel. Two firemen with an axe were the ones left to guard, and they painted the town red. That's one of the reasons they didn't react very well on the assassination. Most of them had hangovers. Of course,
Mm-hmm.
they were told not to engage in security anyway. But anyway, so yeah, that's the
Wait,
time.
wait! Don't
Yeah,
go over
that
that. What do you mean they were told not to engage in security? Who told them this?
we don't know.
Okay.
It's their
One,
testimony.
well, you can see the pictures. You can see the pictures.
Okay.
There's a
So
film.
we're assuming that they were told because of their behavior.
Correct.
Right?
We
Okay.
don't know that.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
Clint Hill, Clint Hill died last week. The guy
Oh,
who,
really?
yeah, the guy who saved Mrs. Kennedy's life, because she would have gone flying off the trunk of that car.
Mm-hmm.
Huh.
He saved her life. Clint Hill just passed away. I think he was 93 just a few days ago. He was the only agent. He wasn't even supposed to be there that day. He was Jackie's personal bodyguard. He wasn't even supposed to be on the presidential detail. Thank God he was. Yeah, he just passed away this past week.
So they start that motorcade in Fort Worth, or am I not understanding the timeline?
Yeah, no, good question. They came into Fort Worth at Carswell the day before.
Mm-hmm.
There was a big acceptance and a big welcome party there. I had a friend that was there, a good friend, a fellow Baptist pastor, and he said he felt a terrible feeling come over him, like, man, something bad's going to happen to the president on this trip, and said, man, I wish I could get to him and tell him about the Lord Jesus Christ. But anyway, so they could have easily driven to Dallas, but they wanted Air Force One to land at Love Field and make a big presentation. And so they started out in Fort Worth at the Chamber of Commerce breakfast that morning. The Texas Boys Choir sang several Texas songs. They gave him a cowboy hat. Kennedy wouldn't put it on. He said, come to Washington. You can see me put it on there. Jackie was late. Jackie came down. LBJ was sitting there with Ladybird. And after he addressed the crowd outside, it had been raining that morning, but he went out. It was still drizzling. They came back in for the Chamber of Commerce breakfast in Fort Worth for Tarrant County. And then they took him back to Carswell. They got on Air Force One and flew just a few miles down to Love Field in Dallas.
Oh, okay. That part always confused me. So
it is confusing, really.
Yeah.
It is a little bit strange, the directions that you're going. You're already there, but then you're going to leave and come back, and then you're going to do this and you're going to do that. I mean, there are a couple things that are very strange about the directions that are taken. This is one thing I've always thought was strange. When you look at this overlay or this sky view of the path that's taken, you have the presidential route, right? The president's coming south, and then he suddenly turns right into Dealey Plaza and takes this very sharp turn going, downhill to give a very, very open, very, very clear view of the president. What was the purpose of taking this seemingly completely unnecessary detour through a very slow street? What was the rationale given at the time, if any?
Excellent question, Jeffrey. Excellent question. The parade route was changed at the last minute. Originally, they were supposed to go straight down Main Street and under the tunnel, under the overpass, and straight out to the area by the Texas State Fairgrounds. Why? Because the manual.
Oh no!
Oh, we just dropped him.
Oh no!
Oh no!
We just lost the man. All right. Well, if you would
let me give him a call.
Oh well, it looks like he's back, but he's muted. So there are several things about the pathway that I've always wondered about. This one here is the main one because you've got, he should be coming straight down. Why did he take this big detour here?
I'm going
through a
to go ahead and
slow
mute
road
myself and give
with
him a
lots
call.
of people. Yeah, if you would please. Let's see. Let me do this here if I can. I might The problem might be on my side because let me see if I can do this. Yep. Just a moment, folks. We are experiencing technical difficulties, but give us just a second to try and get our guest back. So here we go. Just me now. All right. So for me, there are several points about the assassination that don't make sense to me. We've touched on one of them already um, in the route. The route that was taken by the motorcade. Why did the motorcade deviate from its course? Why did it change? Why did it go into Dealey Plaza at all? There's absolutely no reason for this to have occurred. And then also at the same time, there is the question of why was he in an open top vehicle? Now, according to the official timeline that I read, the vehicle had a bubble top that would have gone on in acclimate weather, but they took the top off because it was a nice day. Um, Kennedy, a very good-looking man, perhaps a vain man, wanted to be seen by the people, and that's the reason that's given for why that was taken off. Now, the man that we mentioned who jumped on the back of the car and told Mrs. Kennedy, get down, stay down, when she started climbing out of the car, he was her bodyguard. He was Secret Service, her security detail. And when he was asked about it many, many years later, he said he was himself baffled because there was supposed to be a different car. Now, this is his words. There was supposed to be a different car that was not a convertible. And then at the last minute, the car was changed. Now, that's according to him. And that may be a misunderstanding about that hard shell cover. But it is worth noting there was a car available that would have protected the president from being visible. It's concealment, not cover, right? But would have protected him from being shot, um, at least concealing him from the the anyone who's wanting to shoot him. And then we have the here is another fact that I'll just go ahead and start proceeding on down the line. But let's look at I'm going to see if I can't share the magic bullet. So let's see. All right, I'm going to do this. So Sean, if you want to turn your camera off for a second, that way people aren't watching you on the phone here. But so this is the magic bullet, so called because according to the official narrative from the Warren Commission, the bullet traveled through through President Kennedy's body, through his back, out his throat, hit the seat in front of him, went through Governor Connolly, I believe at the elbow, came up, bounced off the dashboard, and came back over his shoulder, and then struck the president again in the face. And that's how you get that, in that video that we just watched, the Zapruder film, where his head explodes backwards. We were talking about before the show started the laws of
Entropy.
yeah, well, the laws of physics, something that's in motion carries forward. And I say, I don't know
I backed out,
as
but
much
it's
about the
still.
laws of entropy. Mr. Engelman, we can hear you, but we cannot see you. So
Okay, well,
you
we
get
can
your
keep
camera.
talking until we get the camera back going.
Yeah. So Mr. Engelman, go ahead and give me your take on the magic bullet here.
Yeah. Uh, Basically, it's a joke. I've done hunting since I've been 11 and 12 years of age. You never see a pristine bullet,
Mm-hmm.
especially one that supposedly hit 5 targets, come out
Mm-hmm.
looking like it's brand new. It's a joke. It was placed there by Jack Ruby. We know that. They found it on a gurney at Parkland Hospital. And this is the
Mm-hmm.
magic bullet that Arlen Specter, who was the chief counsel for the Warren Commission, later a liberal senator from Pennsylvania, said that danced in the air and went 10 miles an hour and then stopped and sped up, went up and down,
Mm-hmm.
and went through Conley twice, first his nipple and then his wrist, and then went
Yeah.
through the president's back and came out.
Now,
Absolutely.
according, this, you mentioned, Jack Ruby put it on the stretcher. The official title of this photograph that I'm sharing at the moment is "Bullet Found on Gurney."
Yeah, there you
That's
go.
what it's called. It's so they put
Ron.
We got
the
your
dead
video back.
president. All right, you are back, sir. So they put the
Yes.
president, the recently deceased president, his body still warm on a gurney in the hospital, and then a few seconds later, they're like, "Oh, look, there's a bullet just right here."
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That is kind of strange. Like, the bullet exited the man's head with enough force to blow his brains all over the back of the car and all over his wife's lap, but it didn't have enough momentum to carry itself outside of the vicinity of the body, so much so that when they laid his body down, it just kind of fell out.
Yeah, it's so crazy. Uh, as Cyril Weck, ironically, my coroner back in Pennsylvania growing up, he was the medical examiner for Allegheny County in Pittsburgh. He's been one of the chief investigators on the assassination. It's too much to ask for one bullet, and then they
Mm-hmm.
come out in perfect, pristine
Yeah,
condition.
yeah. So here's so there's a YouTuber by the name of Brandon Herrera. He ran for Congress here in Texas this last year, and it would have been cool to see him beat out the rhino that he ran against. But he's also on the short list of people we would love to see for ATF director, because he would really make things great for the 2A community. But he tested this JFK magic bullet theory, and he got a Carcano rifle with Italian ammunition,
Mm-hmm.
shot jugs of water. And if I scroll my mouse around, you can kind of see, he's got this Carcano rifle, he's shooting at these jugs of water, and jugs of water is just about the perfect medium for stopping a bullet without causing stress to the bullet. Much less so than a man's skull, the back of a seat, a man's forearm, his shoulder, and then bouncing off a dashboard. And you can see the bullet right here. I mean, we'll just I'd like to play this just for a few seconds. Let me make sure that the audio is yeah, okay, so the audio is there. Let's just play this for a few seconds. Now, he is a modern young man with a YouTube channel, so the language is not going to be perfect, but this is his assessment.
That is our perfectly preserved 6.5 Carcano, and already it looks more fucked up than the one in the photo. It's interesting, not by much, but you can clearly see the divots and such.
So his assessment of that, looking at this thing, obviously, this bullet is bent right in the middle. Like, it struck plastic with water behind it and bent. And we're supposed to expect that, this thing right here did all of that, same rifle, same caliber, same ammunition, except this is more of a blunt nose, whereas that one was more of a pointed nose. But not that different. And we're supposed to accept that this thing did all that. Beggars belief.
Yeah, we believe that in the research community, some of us, that it was shot through a tube of Jello, like gelatin, Jello
Mm-hmm.
brand gelatin, and it came out that way. But if you shoot it through regular water, we've shot it through watermelons. It comes out
Mm-hmm.
bent and disjointed
Mm-hmm.
and chipped. It's such a crock of manure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Just beggars belief. All right, where were we before we dropped off?
We're on the
You were
parade route.
talking.
The parade
You were
route.
talking
Mhm.
about the change in car also.
Yeah,
Oh
well,
yeah.
that's-
So yeah, that was one thing. Secret Service agent who jumped on the back of the car and told
Clint
Mrs. Kennedy. What was his name again?
Clint Hill,
Clint
Hill.
Hill. I believe it was him. It may have been another one, but I'm fairly certain that it was Mr. Hill. Gave an interview recently. I want to say like in the last 10 years. So this is very far removed. Keep in mind. But he said, to his understanding, that the vehicle was switched at the last second. Or at the last moments, not literally the last second, but according to the timeline. You remember we had the witness statements where people were saying there was a hard shell that would go on the vehicle in case of inclement weather, and if it was nice, leave the top off. And when he arrived on the scene, of course, he's not privy to the particularities necessarily, but he said, they were supposed to have a hard top vehicle, and he showed up and it was a convertible. And to him, that seemed odd, which is why he mentioned it at all. But another thing that, varying paths, magic bullets, and then the car being swapped at the last second.
Yeah, it was an open top convertible. It was a Lincoln Continental. It was the official presidential limousine for 62, 63. Prior to that, they used an old car from the 50s. And because there were so many assassination threats that day, he should have been in a closed car if you're going to have the motorcade at all. It was canceled in Miami just a few months before because they were tipped off. The intelligence unit of the Miami police were tipped off that Kennedy was going to be shot at in Miami. See, the plot started in Chicago. It was foiled. They moved it to Tampa. Then it was foiled, and they moved it to Miami, and it was exposed. And I could go into that. That's very fascinating because the same people in Miami that were planning it came to Dallas to help out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Hello.
there were a lot of people in Dallas that day who weren't from Dallas.
Oh yeah,
A very strange coincidence. Not people
yes.
who were, on site, not people who were, holding rifles in Daily Plaza, but people who were there. If I'm not mistaken, there was you may have heard of him, but a young man from Texas named George Herbert Walker Bush, who would at the time he was the leader of the what is the county that Houston's in? I'm being a bad Texan.
Montgomery or Harris?
I believe it was Harris County. He was the Harris County Republican president of the Harris County Republicans, and he was in Dallas that morning. And different people have said different things. Some people have said that he had a hand in planning the motorcade. From what I've seen, there doesn't seem to be anything to back that up. But then when he's asked about it later, hey, where were you on that day? He says, I can't recall. And that would seem to be a very strange thing for any American who was alive at the time to not know where they were that day, but also to have been in the city where they're not from and to not recall. That does seem to be very strange.
Yeah. Richard Nixon also said he couldn't remember where he was, and he was in Dallas that morning for a Pepsi Cola bottlers convention.
That's very strange.
Yeah, future president Richard Nixon, former vice president.
Former vice president Richard Nixon, one of the best vice presidents we ever had, actually.
Yes, he was. Brilliant. Nixon,
Brilliant man,
oh,
absolutely.
brilliant. And Watergate was a two-bit scandal. And I don't think Nixon or Bush were directly involved.
Hmm.
But the Bush family is CIA all the way, so who knows?
Well, and Bush later became head of the CIA.
Yes, he did.
That was one thing that I ran into whenever I'm studying or reading about the JFK assassination. People be like, George H.W. Bush, CIA man, and then you look at the dates, when he came into the CIA, and it is actually after the assassination that
Yeah,
he
much,
officially
much,
joined.
much later. Much later.
Yeah, much later. He became a senator from Texas. Then he joined the
Congressman.
CIA under the Nixon administration. I mean, it wasn't even until Nixon was president that he became part of the CIA. So, but it is remarkable. Nixon just, he's a little bit of a hobby horse of mine because I think probably the best post World War II president the United States had. And I know that's a controversial take, but that is my take. Um, he said about the Watergate scandal that the people who took me out are the same people who took out Kennedy, and the only reason they didn't kill me is because they didn't have to.
Right.
So quite a heavy statement for a president to say. He seemed to have known who took out Kennedy, but he never spoke about it either.
They're doing the same thing to Trump, and it's the same cabal, the same shadow government, the same intelligentsia, the same swamp, same play, different actors.
Hmm.
And if they don't use assassination, they will use impeachment, like they tried with Nixon, and they tried with President Trump. Two or three times, and they want to do it again. Adam Pencil Neck Shift wants to do it again.
Yeah. Hmm.
Let me real quick. Can we pull up that map of the motorcade route?
Yeah, we never did finish that conversation. I can finish
Oh, yeah,
Because
it
that's where we
I
were.
in 15 seconds.
I
That's what,
would like I would like to hear, yeah, of course, like why they switched it, but
okay.
also, Bruce, when we talked about this in person before, you said there were multiple teams of shooters that were aiming at Kennedy that morning, and
Oh yes, there were.
and so if you could, I know you can see the map on the screen. Can you
Yes, sir.
kind of like tell us where these different teams and who they are? And so exactly what you, because you described it as a a sniper's nest of like there was no way he could have got out of Daily Plaza alive
No way.
because there were so could you kind of walk us through who's where and where
Yes,
they're yeah.
absolutely. So the motorcade starts out at Love Field. It goes down Mockingbird Lane and Lemon Street and all that. And then finally they go to Main Street because they were expecting a huge crowd. And it was. People had come out from the cafes and the diners and the downtown restaurants. And a lot of the employers let them take the lunch hour off to see the president come through. It was a big deal. Big deal. And it was Kennedy's first real tour through Dallas. And so they came out. The sidewalks were 12, 15 people deep. And they came down Main Street. And as I started to say when we had technical difficulty, according to the Secret Service manual for the presidential detail in 62, 63, you were never supposed to slow down under 35 or 40 miles an hour, and you were never to make a right-hand hairpin turn or a 45-degree angle turn. At the last minute, they were supposed to go straight. Remember I was saying when we had technical difficulty, they're supposed to go straight under the overpass out toward the state fairgrounds and then kind of reconfigure and do a U-turn and then get back on the Stemmons and go out to where they're going to have lunch at the Trade Mart. But at the last minute, and I say the last minute, it was published in the papers that morning, that they were going to turn right onto Elm Street, onto Houston Street. Right there, you can see it. They're turning now onto Houston. Motorcycles have just turned
And there's a cut
left on
here.
Elm. Left on Elm.
And then here is the presidential motorcade. Now, this is something that I noticed just today, actually, when reviewing the film, is these motorcycles right here, in between the president and the president's left hand. Notice their behavior. They are abreast of the president at this point in the film, and they suddenly slow down and hold back.
Jeffrey, that is very observant. I've watched this thing literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times, and I've been investigating it since it came out in '75. The Zapruder. I've never noticed that before. I did know that they weren't in line with the limo. Okay, a motorcycle escort, whether it's France, Russia at this time, or the United States or England, has three purposes. Number one, to keep the crowd back, and they
Mm-hmm.
serve that purpose. Some of the motorcycle escort cops in Dallas PD said, man, they almost ran over a couple of pedestrians were coming out over the curb. Number
Mm-hmm.
two, number two, it's to make a human shield around the limo. And then
Mm-hmm.
number three, it's to kind of act as a cushion or a kind of a fence, as it were, a hedge, as it were, of any projectiles coming out, whether it's somebody throwing a hand grenade or just even a firecracker from the crowd or
Mm-hmm.
projectile bullets.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when the motorcycles are pulled back, they're not doing any of those three things.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that occurs to me is, this observation that I've made could possibly be just an artifact of the angle because the cars are turning in front of the camera at this point.
It could have
But
been.
it certainly does seem like these motorcycles are abreast of the limousine, slow down, and are being overtaken now by the car behind the president. The president is shot while the vehicle is slowing down. The motorcycles are slowing down even more precipitously than the president's limousine, which is also slowing down. It is not speeding up on this downhill road. It is slowing down. So a very, very strange behavior from people who, well, I mean that would have been at least negligent. And if that were foreplanned, that would have been exactly. It's one of those things where it's like, if you wanted to let something happen, how would you have behaved differently? And the answer is you really wouldn't have. This
It's
behavior is
it,
exactly.
it makes me angry because, again, the protocol on Secret Service, if you hear a pop, an explosion, I don't care if it's a firecracker, a firework, or an actual gunshot, you are to speed up and get out of there.
Get out.
What did 54-year-old William Greer do? He stops. He applies the
Mm-hmm.
brakes.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
then, like you say, that was very observant. Then the motorcycle cops pull back as well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Give
Yeah.
him, give it,
Very,
give
very
him some
angry.
space, guys. Let's make sure we
Mm-hmm.
don't get hit.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
So could you pull that map up again? Because I wanted to. This was a question that I had with. So walk us through who all has shooters in this crowd.
Oh my goodness. The question is, who doesn't? When I
Right.
first moved to Texas, they used to have several research centers and museums, and I don't mean the sixth floor. They just purport and push the stupid Warren Commission theory, the government theory that Oswald did it by himself and he had no accomplices. And by the way, one of those motorcycle cops threw his motorcycle down, brandished his service revolver, ran up the steps, grabbed Roy Truly, the superintendent of the Texas School Book Depository, where some of the shots allegedly came from, because he saw pigeons flying off after the first shot, and goes, let's do a room by room tour. Truly goes, okay. They walk into the little cafeteria. It's a little lunchroom, actually. And Oswald has his hand up a Coke machine and his lunch bag, and he's arrested. He's arrested for 1 second. And Truly
Mm-hmm.
says, no, he works here. He's okay. All right.
Yeah, apprehended. The witness testimony about Mosley's travel is actually, the girl on the stairs. What did she see? A very interesting thing. And maybe that's what we should go to next. But
Well,
Sean, you were
let me
saying
just
about,
finish. Let me just, if I may, Jeffrey, finish Sean's
mm-hmm.
question. There were at least 3 teams. So I went into this one research center when I first moved to Texas in the late 90s, and I said, I want to shoot you a very outlandish, go out on the limb, outlandish theory. Could there have been more than one team? He goes, absolutely. He said, in fact, that's what the House Select Committee said. There were 2
Mm-hmm.
separate teams, Oswald in the 6th floor, and then another shooter from behind the picket fence. So Yeah.
Where is the picket fence on this map?
The picket fence is right behind where Zapruder was filming. Actually,
Oh, okay.
a little to his right, up in the park, up in the what we call the grassy knoll area.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, I can't point. I tried to point to it, but I can't. I
Right.
can't point to your map. I don't have a
Well,
pointer.
Jeff was just having his arrow there. Was that an
Yeah.
accurate?
So
Yeah,
Zapruder's location is right here, and the
right.
grassy
Correct.
knoll is here, just slightly to his right. So if the shooter were on the grassy knoll, he would have been shooting across, as it were,
Yeah.
in front of Zapruder, this direction,
Yes.
and then the picket fence would have been, probably this line right here. That's probably the picket fence. You can probably see it in between where he's at and they are.
I actually believe there were two shooters on the grassy knoll, and
Mm-hmm.
Kennedy got hit from the front and the side simultaneously. To
Mm-hmm.
answer your question, Sean, James Files, who recently ate dinner at the Old South Pancake House in Fort Worth, because he said he had breakfast there with some of the other conspirators on the morning of the assassination. They passed out fake Secret Service IDs, which they did have, by the way. And then a cadet for the Dallas Police Force, Roscoe White, who confessed on his deathbed that he was one of the shooters. He was the badge man. You can actually see a cop shooting from behind the fence. The Men Who Killed Kennedy. It's a British series. I strongly encourage it was outlawed in this country for years. Leave it to the BBC. But the
Now,
BBC
that
exposed
where
this
you
guy
say
with
you could
a
see
badge.
the where you say you could see the officers shooting from behind the fence. Um, that's uh, is that on the Zapruder film or is that some other footage?
That was taken off some other pictures. There were other movie cameras that were
Mm-hmm.
or video cameras, movie cameras in that day, actually on the other side of the motorcade,
Mm-hmm.
and they blew it up, and you could actually see a cop shooting.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, I remember that was one of the so you remember when we were talking about the House Select Committee on Assassinations, what sparked their new investigation. And there were two things primarily, and one was the sound, that they could observe within the sound recording that there were at least 6 shots taken,
Mm-hmm.
probably more, but there were 6 distinct shots for certain. And then also the fact that there was this other footage where you could see puffs of smoke coming from a different direction, which would have been, like gunfire smoke. Of course, this is in the world of smokeless powder. It's just not like a big, black powder plume, but there's something coming out that is observable from a different direction. And from what I understand, that footage was destroyed when that so it was seen, the committee was formed, and then that footage was just lost when the committee asked for it, and that's why they came to an inconclusive. Um, they had an inconclusive ending where they didn't say, "Yeah, this definitely happened." They just said there is a likelihood that there were, multiple shooters from multiple directions, and at least 2.
Yep.
Am I getting that right? Because
Yeah,
that's one
pretty
thing that.
close. There were puffs of smoke.
Uh-huh. But
Senator Ralph Yarborough, who was in the motorcade, one of 2 Texas senators, he had been in the military, and he said he saw the puffs of smoke and smelled the gunpowder around the grassy knoll area.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the smell of gunpowder is not something that's going to waft down from 6 floors above.
Exactly. Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Do we want to get specifically into Lee Harvey Oswald? Because you had mentioned some things before we recorded that I thought were interesting. You had said that Oswald was framed. You said that he was actually trying to save Kennedy. Did we bring that up on while we were recording?
Yeah. So show us your button.
Yeah, I showed this at the very outset of the program. And it says Lee Harvey Oswald did not kill JFK. He died trying to save him. And we have actually had memorials for him, a little memorial on the 22nd at the cemetery on the border of Arlington and Fort Worth on Lancaster, East Lancaster.
Now, what is the grave that you would have to look for to actually find it?
Yeah, for any of your researchers out there, or just people interested in history, you're not going to find his grave because they're not going to tell you. And it's just a little tombstone that says Oswald because the tombstone had been stolen so many times. So there's an
Mm.
adjacent little marker, like a little tiny inset tombstone with the name Nick Beef. They say he was a comedian in Dallas in '63. I think it was a fictitious name for people that need to identify where the location is. And sometimes you can go online and say, how do I find the grave? Because they're not going to tell you in the office at Rose Hill Cemetery.
Mm-hmm. Hmm.
So you had said that the rifle that he used, you described it as useless. What do you mean by that?
It was an Italian leftover from World War II. You know, the Axis powers, the main Axis powers. There were others, but the main ones were, of course, Germany, Italy, and Japan. And the Italian soldiers were issued this Mannlicher Carcano with a hyphen in the middle, and it was so inaccurate that the Italian soldiers reportedly dubbed it the mercy weapon because it wouldn't hit any of the Ethiopian soldiers in Africa.
So, a rifle. First off, a short-barreled rifle. This is a carbine.
Right,
This is not a marksman rifle. It's a carbine with a carbine length barrel, a short barrel,
right.
and it's renowned before 20 years before the Kennedy assassination. It has this reputation of being highly inaccurate, and it's a mass-produced Italian firearm. Today you hear about Italian firearms, you're thinking of Beretta shotguns and Beretta pistols, which are just very high quality.
Right.
Italian firearms at this time and during World War II were not renowned for quality
Correct.
of any
Correct.
sort at all.
Very true. Yeah. In fact, they uncovered the first weapon uncovered. I have the original NBC. God has been so good to me. He just dumps all this evidence in my lap. At a little library out in East Texas, I found the NBC transcripts. The first weapon pulled out of the depository was not even the Mannlicher Carcano. It was a
Hmm.
German Mauser. And, I'm sorry, it was a British Enfield found on the second floor. I do believe there was one of the sniper teams on the second floor of the depository. And they bring it out and they hold it up for the press to see. And it's a British Enfield. And then 3 policemen signed affidavits, I can give you their names, that the rifle picked out of the sniper's perch on the 6th floor was actually a German Mauser. The
Mm-hmm.
Carcano was not found until much later.
Right, and the Mauser and um, the Enfield both are renowned. I mean, the Enfield is in a lot of ways copies the Mauser action.
Right.
Both of those are very accurate, very precision crafted rifles, unlike an Italian Carcano.
I'm of German descent. Notice they had to bring in the assassination teams had to bring in a German gun to replace the. And I'm also 1/4 English, so they had to bring in a German gun and a British gun to really get the job done because that man
Yeah, well,
ain't
if you
going to
need
cut
something
it.
done, call the Saxons.
Yeah.
That's right.
You
Exactly.
had mentioned that there was a freeway sign blocking Lee Harvey Oswald's shot. Can you explain that?
Yes, on November 22nd, '63, there was a huge highway sign, and the interstate system was brand new. And at that time, the Stemmons Freeway was a tollway, and there was a huge sign. As my friend Jim, the late Jim Mars, would often point out, whoever the snipers in several different perches. But for Oswald, from his vantage point, where they say he was shooting out of the 6th floor window on the far end, on the far east end of the building, he would have had to have shot through that sign, and he didn't because it blocked his view for about 2 seconds,
Mhm.
a second and a half.
So that sign, if we're looking at, I know this might be hard for you to see on the screen, but this sign would have been perhaps at the end of this arrow that's kind of halfway through the trajectory down Elm Street.
Yeah, right about there. Yes,
Yeah,
as you turn left on Elm Street. Yes.
yeah, and then the shots would have taken place, as we pointed out, fortuitously right in front of Mr. Zapruder. So right about where this where this vehicle here, which looks like a kind of a grocery truck, right about where it is parked, is where things would have started and then ended right in front of the grassy knoll, that stretch of land there. So
Correct.
for him to shoot from the 6th floor, um, quite high, down into this vehicle, there would have been a sign here telling the traffic coming out of this downtown area that, in order to merge onto the highway, this is the lane you need to be in, and such things like that.
I spent the 40th anniversary all day with Governor Jesse Ventura, the governor at that time of
Mm-hmm.
Minnesota. He had been a sniper for the Navy SEALs. He said,
Mm-hmm.
Bruce, he said, no professional hitman or sniper, either military or paramilitary, is going to wait for the car to go away. You always take the high percentage shot, which would have
Mm-hmm.
been the limousine coming down Houston Street toward
Right.
the window.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. So why would he have waited for them to be in that hairpin turn and driving away from him? Why would he
Exactly.
not have taken that shot on Houston Street,
Right.
driving, if he's in that corner window, as he is alleged to have been, where they found the Carcano and the bullet casings, which they later staged for a Photoshop in that same location, which has, even the photographer who took the pictures says that the photos were staged because we picked up the rifles and the shell casings, then we realized, oh, we need pictures of those, so we just set them right back down. No
Yeah.
no harm done, and we took pictures of them. Very very strange thing to say. But why would he have been in this corner? Why would he have waited for the bill? If he really wanted to take it, in this hairpin right there, that's the closest range. They're slowed down quite a bit, but it's once they're past him and they're still driving slowly through this area, not speeding up downhill. That's where the shots are taken, right in here. Very,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
very strange behavior from uh, a man who was not a professional sniper or a professional assassin. So, give us the skinny on Lee Harvey Oswald. You take quite a strong stance, one that I'm not willing to join you yet, where you say not only did he not take the shot and was he a patsy, which my personal opinion, which is worth as much, it's worth what you pay for it, which is nothing. Uh, I think he probably did take shots, but he wasn't alone, which is that's what the Select Committee on Assassination says. But what is it that what is your view of this man that gives you this perspective on him? Who is Lee Oswald?
We don't know.
Hmm.
We do not know who this guy is, but the least that we're pretty sure that the Lee Harvey Oswald, there were like five Lee Harvey Oswalds running around Dallas for 2 months setting up an MO, a false MO. And that is brought out in the first movie to ever come out, Executive Action, in the early 70s. Mark Lane helped produce that. Mark Lane was the Kennedy campaign manager in New York. We don't know who he was because when he went to Russia, see, he was in the Marine Corps. He served with Roscoe White in Japan at Sugi Air Force Base. He was fluent in Russian. I've always found it kind of a stretch the other way that here's a patriotic Marine who's a communist.
Mm-hmm.
So the Lee Harvey Oswald, according to U.S. Army records, who left at Sugi Air Force Base studying espionage, the Russian language, and radio control. When he went to Russia, he was 6'2", but when he got back to Dallas, his brother Robert said, that's not Lee. And he had shrunk from 6'2" down, 6'1", 6'2" down to about 5'10" and a half, 5'9" and a half, which was the Oswald that was arrested.
Yeah, everybody's seen the picture of Jacob Rubenstein shooting Oswald, and he's not a tall man. See if I can pull it up real quick. Do images
real quick, Bruce. While he's pulling that up, so what was Oswald doing that day in the school book depository, and then what gun was he taking shots with, if he took any shots?
You mentioned Buell Frazier earlier. I interviewed Buell for my book when he was alive. Obviously, when he was alive, he's
Yeah.
can't interview him very well when he's deceased. Buell was the guy that picked him up and took him to work that day. He was spending time with his family, Marina and the little kids, in a suburb of Dallas and Irving, which is a museum now. You can go to the house where he lived. And then he was spending weekends. I'm sorry, vice versa. He'd go to Irving on weekends. And then Monday through Friday, he was living at a boarding house in a section of Dallas. And that's also a museum. And I highly recommend that you go there. And so Buell picks him up in Irving to bring him to work that day, November 22nd, 63, early Friday morning. And he's got these things wrapped. And I asked Buell, I said, did Lee tell you what was wrapped up in there? Because the Warren Commission said it was the Mannlicher Carcano. He said, Bruce, this is Buell Frazier himself. He said, Bruce, he told me they were curtain rods, and I believed him because Lee had never lied to me before. He said curtain rods. He was going to put up some drapes in the boarding house in Oak Cliff. So what was your question again?
Well, okay, so you had said that he was actually trying to stop the assassination, right?
I have come to that conclusion. Jim Myers and I have come to that conclusion in the last 10, 12 years, yes.
So
I know he never did it. I knew he never did it.
What rifle did he have up there?
He didn't have any rifle.
Well, he didn't have any rifle.
So this is one fact about the Carcano rifle that I've heard, which is that when the Dallas Police Department got their hands on the Carcano, they checked it and did not find Lee Harvey Oswald's fingerprints.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead and elaborate on that, because that's a very strange, a very odd set of events that happened with the Carcano rifle that allegedly took the president's life. So, if you would, sir.
Yeah, I was interviewed on WLW radio, the giant radio up in the Midwest, 38 states, half of Canada, voice of the Reds and the Bengals. And they interviewed me and a guy that had just come out with a book that was hired by the CIA to purchase, and he has the bill of sales, pictures, everything, purchase 3 Mannlicher Carcanos and take them from a sporting goods store in Baltimore, Maryland, outside of Washington, take them to New Orleans where the assassination was hatched. 80% of it was hatched in Louisiana, the other 20% in Chicago. And to take these 3 Mannlicher Carcanos. So there were a bunch of Mannlicher Carcanos in Dallas that day. But you're right, there were no fingerprints. Then 2 days later, they said, well, we found palm prints. Well, what happened was the funeral director said the FBI came out at 2 in the morning or midnight when there was nobody there at the funeral parlor, and they were getting ready to embalm Lee's body, and they put his palm all over the stock of the gun.
Yeah, and that's a witness testimony from the man. Very, that's not something that people dispute, that he said, yeah, the FBI showed up, grabbed a rifle, put it in Lee Harvey Oswald's hand, and then walked out with the rifle. Like, that was the only thing he came in. He came in with a rifle, put it in the dead man's hand, and then walked out. And this is the same rifle that the Dallas Police Department said we have no fingerprints on. And then the FBI says, oh, well, we found his fingerprints all over it.
Palm prints, yeah.
Yeah.
You guys know what a paraffin test is?
I do.
Well, I know paraffin is wax.
Right. There was a test that was big back in the 60s by both the FBI and the Dallas Police called a paraffin test. And the gunpowder residue would show up on a cheek if you were using a rifle. They did the paraffin test on Oswald. There was no sign of gunpowder.
So it's, the modern equivalent of that is the swab that they, put in if it catches gunpowder. But, putting wax on the surface of the skin, peeling it away, and then observing the surface of that wax for gunpowder. And they found no gunpowder residues.
Zero.
So
Now, how reliable is such a test? Is this like the modern swab test where it's open and shut? If it's not there, it couldn't have
It,
happened.
it obviously it's not as sophisticated and totally reliable. This one is more reliable today, but yeah, by
Mm-hmm.
1960 standards, the paraffin test was pretty good.
Hmm. Wow.
It was, you could use it as evidence in a murder trial.
Mm-hmm.
Also, 30-06 shells were found on top of the county records building.
Uh-huh. And the
Yeah,
the county records building was
you can pull up the map.
perpendicular to the Dealey Plaza.
uh county records building was the one, so they would have been shooting down on him while he's driving away from them.
Yeah,
If they're in this building while he's going through Houston Street, he probably would have been too close, underneath them for them to have taken a shot at him. He's coming from their left, coming in, and then he takes this very slow, starts going that direction. That would have been um, that would have been when you would have shot him from that location.
exactly. And they found a sabot, or in French sabot,
A Sabo round.
sabot round, and that
Hmm.
basically what they did was they took a 30-06. The conspirators and the assassins took a 30-06 bullet and put it in a Mannlicher Carcano casing.
Hmm.
It's called a Sabo.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there was one of the gunmen there. That was one of the teams up there.
Hmm.
So as Sean said, he was not going to get out alive. There were
Mm-hmm.
shots coming from every angle.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So how many shots do you think were taken that day, according
At
to what you've seen?
what I've seen and studied for 50 years, at least nine.
9.
Nine.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them were with a silencer. That's why you don't hear them. And some of them were shot simultaneously. So the percussion sounded like one shot. But we know there were at least 4 to 6. Like
Mm-hmm.
you've said that several times, Jeffrey. I've
Yeah,
heard
yeah.
as nine. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, I've seen a digital projection of the recording that caused the House Select Committee on Assassinations to open up the investigation, and there are 6 distinct peaks. One and then 2 of them right next to each other, then another one, and then one more, and then a last one. That may have been 6. That might not have been 6. I'm a little tired, but 6 distinct peaks, um, and all within that 6-second window, more or less. Six bullets in 6 seconds from one bolt action rifle just really isn't possible.
No.
Much less
No.
at that range. Having to reacquire your sights. It's just even Jerry Miculek could not pull that off.
When the former Soviet Union released some secret documents about Oswald's residence there, again, he supposedly expatriated or exiled
Hmm.
himself to Russia because he just loved the Soviet communist system. So they said that he joined a rod and gun club, a hunting club,
Hmm.
outside of Minsk, where he worked at a radio factory. And they said the other hunters had a joke: if you take Lee rabbit hunting with you, you better take a spotter, an extra hunter, just to spot, because Lee is such a bad shot, he cannot hit the broadside of a barn with a scattered 12 gauge. So
Hmm.
here we got a guy, they say Oswald's up there shooting like Annie Oakley and Wild Buffalo Bill with extreme precision, so well that he doesn't hit Mrs. Kennedy. He doesn't actually nick one of the Secret Service agents with a
Hmm.
rifle that doesn't work. And he's a terrible shot at a moving target going away behind a sign and through a paracantha tree that was in full bloom. It's fiction.
Hmm.
And that is a lot. It's not quite. It's not quite. There's a tree in front of the window that you can't see through, but it
No, but at
is.
one point the car passed under it. You're right. It wasn't
Yeah.
right in front of the window, but it was like halfway between the depository and the Stemmons Freeway sign, if I
Hmm.
recall correctly. I
Hmm.
don't think they're either. Neither of those are there now.
Hmm.
So the big question that I have at this point is why? Why did they do it? Who did it? Who was behind planning it? What was the reason for it? Because I know that that's one of the more speculative aspects of the whole assassination. Why kill Kennedy? I have some audience questions related to that.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd like to just hear your take on that. Who do you think was behind it? Why did they do it?
I know who was behind it.
Okay.
Both. I don't know who the master planner was. Was it Clay Shaw? He was one of them in New Orleans. He had CIA connections. And at the time, a lot of people felt it was the richest man in the world at that time. And was it Lyndon Johnson? I get asked the two questions I get asked. I'm speaking at both Kiwanis clubs here. Everybody wants me to speak now because of the files purportedly coming out, thanks to President Trump. But at least President Trump is trying to release some of them. That's more than all the other presidents did. And so I give him kudos and props for that. But the questions I get asked in Q&As, whether it's a Lions Club, Eagles Club, Toastmasters Club, whatever, number one, do you fear for your life? And I don't, because you can't scare me with heaven. I'm saved. I'm going to heaven. I'm born again Christian. That'd actually be nice in a way.
Yeah, don't threaten me with a good time.
The Lord has protected me for 50 years when a lot of the perpetrators were still alive. Most of them are died off. But the second question is, did LBJ do it? Did President Lyndon Johnson, his successor at that time, the VP, did he do it? Was he the master planner? I don't know who the master planner was. There may have been a cabal, and I think there was some oil men from Texas, and LBJ and J. Edgar Hoover were definitely involved in the cover-up. But I know that it was definitely a CIA mafia hit. They were working together to exterminate Fidel Castro, the communist dictator of Cuba, in Operation Mongoose. They were planting explosives in his cigars. They were hiring prostitutes to kill him. And so the mechanism was already there, the CIA and the mob cooperating to whack Castro, but they turned their aim away from Fidel and aimed it at JFK. Every one of the suspects, one of them had mafia ties and CIA ties directly.
And it would be because JFK wanted to rein in the power that the CIA had. Would that be the reason?
Yes. Good point, Sean. Or even do away with them. He took a dollar bill shortly before he was shot. He said, here's what I would really like to do with the CIA. And he threw him up into the air. He said, I'd like to throw the CIA to the wind and just do away with it. Because they had botched up the Bay of Pigs, for one thing.
Yeah. So
yeah.
Give us the 5-second on what was the Bay of Pigs.
The Bay of Pigs was an invasion to take back Cuba. Very quickly, little history lesson. Batista was the dictator in the late 40s and 50s, and he was kind of corrupt. It was Vegas before Vegas. The two Vegases before Vegas were Arlington, Texas, and Cuba, Havana. In Godfather Part 2, they bring that out. I don't recommend these movies with a lot of profanity, but nonetheless. And so they overthrew Fidel Castro and Che Guevara, two young rebels who were supposed to be Democratic Republicans, turned out to be Soviet-backed commies. They overthrew Batista's regime, and they took over. And Castro was the self-proclaimed presidente. And the Bay of Pigs was kind of in response to overthrow him, get him off the island. It's only 92 miles from Miami, for goodness sake. And then you had the Cuban Missile Crisis in '62. So the CIA hired the mob to whack Castro.
So the Bay of Pigs, that was not, according to the sources that have been documented, that was not American soldiers invading Cuba.
Okay.
Allegedly, it was trained partisans, right? We get Cubans, we train them, we send them in, just like we were doing in Vietnam. Just observers, not actually engaged.
Right. And that was part of the crux. By the way, 3 of the trainers were David Ferry, Lee Harvey Oswald, and especially Jack Ruby. Jack was running guns to Cuba for the CIA. And they had an actual paramilitary base set up at Lake Pontchartrain outside of New Orleans, where they were planning the invasion. And Kennedy he promised the Cuban exiles, not American naval or Marines, to hit the beaches, but by the way, I lived in Florida. The most patriotic people I ever met, and they're all ultra conservative Republicans, are the Cuban community in Miami because they wanted to get away from, so anyway, long story short, Kennedy promised air support for the Cuban exiles. He decided not to at the last minute. He was afraid of World War III. And so the CIA always held that against him, as the Cuban community did. That's real quick. I could spend 2 hours just on the Bay of Pigs. And it was a fiasco. They got gunned down on the beaches, and many of them were taken prisoners as POWs.
Mm-hmm.
And they blame Kennedy.
So, Jeff, if you don't have anything to throw in there real quick, I want to talk about the new stuff that is supposed to be leaked. And I want to start with what?
Yep. He disappeared. So we will never know what he wanted to start with. He was doing just fine until he said what.
Am I back?
You're back.
You weren't back till you said what. Yeah. You were doing just fine, and then you booted yourself.
Yeah.
But you wanted to start with the new stuff that's coming out.
Yeah. So have you, Bruce, listened to, now we lost Jeff. Have you listened to the Joe Rogan interview with Donald Trump right before the election?
Bits and pieces of it, not the whole thing.
Joe Rogan brought up if Trump was going to leak but like just basically give the people the Kennedy files.
Mm-hmm.
And
I
Trump
have the clip. It's 55 seconds long. Do you want to just play it?
Go ahead. Play that. Play that.
I'd love to see that. I have not seen it. I'd love to see it.
Here we go.
Okay, great.
One thing I want to talk to you about is the JFK files. And one of the things that you said was that if they showed you what they showed me, this was your quote, you wouldn't want people to know it either.
There's a Martin Luther King file too, by the way, that they'd like to see. But JFK in particular. So they called me, a lot of good people called me, and they asked me not to do it. So I said, well, we'll close it for another time. But I think I've opened 50%, but I was asked not to do it, and I thought that was a reasonable ask, but now I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it immediately, almost immediately upon entering office.
When people look at it from the outside and you sort of imagine what could be a reason why they would not release those files, it would be there's people that were implicated in the assassination.
Yeah. Well, when they're living people, you generally tend not to want to do it. When people are still living
people that formerly work for the government.
And living people that were somehow involved in it, and you tend not to do that. But it's time to open them.
So living people who are living at the time of his first presidency, who are presumably not living now. When did George H.W. Bush die? Didn't he die during Biden's presidency?
Yes, just not too long ago, about 2 years ago. By the way, I recommend 3 books. Well, 4 actually. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. My book, Eternal Flame. This is the granddaddy of all. But you notice at the top it says the documents will not be released till 2039. So President Trump is way ahead of the ball game, and it is because a lot of political leaders still alive could be involved or implicated, or at least their dads. And by the way, the other 2 books, On the Trail of the Assassins by Jim Garrison, he was the DA of New Orleans Parish, and then my book, Eternal Flame, and then any of Bob Grodin's books, but especially his 2 pictorial books. He has pictures that you won't see anywhere else. And Bob's still alive.
Why 2039?
Well, they said because they didn't want to hurt the Kennedy family, too graphic, and and they want, and I think it's because that's what they said, protect the Kennedys, and the grief. I think it was because what President Trump said. There are some people that there's going to be some names if the files are even still there. See, I've been investigating this thing for 40 years, guys. I've gone to get files myself, and they go, they're missing. They're missing. Rose Sheremy's birth certificate, her death certificate, her DC. I went to get it in East Texas, and the lady turned white. She said, we don't have it. She said, I've worked here for 28 years or whatever. And she said, I've never had a missing death certificate, but I got a hold of it. And Rose Sheremy was the one who said Jack Ruby's going to kill my president in 2 days. And that's all. I have 3 chapters of my book on Rose Sheremy. I actually broke that murder case wide open. And the Lord just dropped it in my lap. Yeah, Rose Sheremy had pre-knowledge of the assassination and said it would be Jack Ruby. And when she was arrested, she was one of the first suspects taken into custody. And when she was arrested by the Louisiana State Police, she told Lieutenant Fruget, he goes, "Who's this Oswald that just wiped out Ruby a couple hours ago? Was that Sunday, 24th?" And she said, "Oh, I see him all the time in the Carousel Club. You know, Jack was her boss. She was a dancer.
Yeah.
And David Ferry and Lee are there all the time." Well, the Warren Commission would say 2 years later that Lee Harvey Oswald, Jack Ruby, and David Ferry never met, not even one time. And yet they hung out together. She said they were homosexual lovers, all three of them, or bisexual. Lee was bisexual, and David Ferry, who was a reputed homosexual, self-admitted, and Jacob Rubenstein were homosexuals. She said she told Lieutenant Fruget on the morning of the 24th, they're bedmates, they're lovers.
Well, I mean,
and she was murdered. And
behavior.
I uncovered her assassin. I found her assassin and interviewed him for my book. Alleged assassin.
Right.
So what do you think is going to come out in the new things? Because we had talked recently at the last SCV meeting. We were talking about this, and you had said they released some stuff that people were saying was new, but you knew about 25 years ago.
Yeah.
So what is the stuff that's been released that you are saying is stuff that you already knew, but then what could also be released?
Okay, great question, Sean. First of all, many of the files are missing. I mean, it's been over 55 years. Okay. Just like the Epstein files are missing.
Yeah.
Right? Okay.
Yeah.
My wife still believes he's alive, and many people do. I definitely don't think he hung himself. I think he was murdered myself. My wife and I disagree a little bit on that, but it wouldn't surprise me if he were alive. But anyway, here's the deal on the files, okay? I'm not expecting anything. I think most of them are missing or have been stolen, and the few that are there have been redacted. Just like the Epstein file that came out last week, the far left is calling for Pam to resign, the new attorney general. Pam Bondi, right? Pamela Bondi.
Yeah, Pam Bondi.
Great woman. I lived in Florida for 3 years. Great DA, yeah. But anyway, yeah, she needs to resign because what she released, we've already had, 3 years ago.
It's highly redacted.
Highly redacted.
It's more redacted than some of the stuff that's on the internet right now.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm not holding my breath. And anything that is released, I've known about it for 40 years. Like the party in Dallas the night before. And I think this might be what Trump is referring to. There was a big party the night before in Dallas. And some pretty key people in the oil industry of Texas and the Washington intelligentsia were at that meeting. And President Nixon was at that meeting. Vice President Nixon, former Vice President Nixon, was even at that meeting. Lyndon Johnson was there. J. Edgar Hoover had flown in for that meeting. And it happened about 11 o'clock at night. I won't mention who's home, but I know whose home it was at. And you would know his name. Prominent civic leader in Dallas. And Madeline Brown, LBJ's mistress, he had slipped out of the hotel the night where he and Kennedy spent in Hotel Fort Worth, now the Hilton. And she picked him up and they went over to this party in Dallas. And, there were hors d'oeuvres and people were chatting and champagne and cocktails. And about 10 or 11 o'clock, Lyndon Johnson said, "Honey, we're going to have a little business meeting in that conference room. Excuse me for about a half hour to an hour." So the meeting lasted about an hour. And they got into the car, and she had to hurry up and take LBJ back to his hotel room in Fort Worth before Lady Bird, his wife, woke up. And they get in the car, and she says, "Honey," she's driving. The vice president is riding shotgun with no security. And she says, "Honey, what were you all discussing there in that little meeting?" And LBJ looked at her and says, and I appreciate it, Madeline, you never asked me about government business or personal business. And I'm not going to tell you what we discussed in there, but I'm going to tell you this. Tomorrow morning, the Kennedys will never make fun of me again. So I think it's going to be stuff like that that's going to expose the CIA's connection to the mob. It's going to expose the fact that there were 5 or 6 or 7 assassination teams in the plaza. People say, "Bruce, you're crazy." There's 1 or 2 maybe. Well, the Congresswoman, she's doing a good job. She's upset. The young lady from Florida. President Trump put her in charge of it. She found one document that there were at least 2 shooters. Well, we knew that since the 70s.
Yeah, well, she's probably just quoting directly from the House Select Committee on Assassinations, who said there were at
Exactly.
least 2 shooters. That was
Precisely.
their finding. So she's
Precisely.
reiterating, there's the government perspective on one side, one shooter, it was Oswald by himself. On the other side, you have the Committee on Assassination says no, there was definitely at least 2. So you can take either side of that position and still consider it the official narrative. I think probably the official narrative, even of the House Select Committee on Assassinations, doesn't go nearly far enough.
Oh, not far enough. And I know you believe that Oswald was one of the snipers, and he may have been. The one thing Jim Myers warned us about this case, we know nothing about it. Everything's theory. Everything's supposition, But I want to ask you two fellas something. You've asked me a lot of great questions. I'd like to pose one to you fellas. Do you think that maybe one of the reasons all these people called President Trump up and we know the election was definitely stolen. I'll debate anybody on national TV. I can prove that election was stolen. He won it going. Yeah. I was up in Michigan. I saw the 2 ballots coming into every Democrat voter, say vote twice. Trust me, it was stolen. But anyway, in his first administration, he got all these calls. Remember that? Thanks for playing that Rogan clip. I had not seen that. Do you gentlemen think that it might be because the Bushes were implicated? I don't think they were, but what do you think? Is that a possibility?
I think George H.W. Bush had a hand in killing Kennedy.
Do you really?
I do. And the reason is, George P. Bush was, he took a break from running for office for 1 year or, one election cycle. And it's that election cycle when Kennedy gets killed. George H.W. Bush immediately on the end of it runs for Senate, goes from being, his dad's not from Texas. He's the leader of the
Connecticut,
Houston,
Prescott Bush.
Yeah, Prescott Bush. He's in Connecticut, and then he goes down to Houston, and suddenly he becomes was it senator or congressman? Yeah, he becomes a congressman representing Houston.
Yeah. Go figure.
Not even from there. He gets set up in the oil business when he's got, nothing to do with the oil business. It's just the entire family is just a story of corruption upon corruption, making a lot of money off of some very, very shady deals. And then he gets elevated all the way to vice president of the United States. I look at it this way. If somebody's capable of assassinating a president and they're capable of, removing a president, they're capable of installing a president.
Thank you.
And who is it that comes in as president, stands up in front of the world as, the light that he's going to show to the world, what we are going to be is we're going to establish a new world order. And that's what we've been living under ever since. And it really, we lost him again. But that new world order that was established by George H.W. Bush is the same one that we've been living under really since the Reagan administration. I lay more blame at the feet of Reagan than some people would like. I don't think he was as great of a president as a lot of people make him out to be. All right. Let's see. There's one other. I'm gonna riff on this for a little bit because this is kind of a hobby horse of mine. Has nothing apropos of nothing. You might want to kill your video, Sean. I'm going to do some more sharing of something. But there was an investigative journalist named Dorothy Kilgallen. And Dorothy Kilgallen was a very, very sharp young lady. Well, I don't know how young she was when she died. She was 52, so she wasn't a young lady. But she was no old woman either. But a very, very intelligent woman. And where the thing that got me into the JFK assassination, ever since I was a kid, my parents always said, oh yeah, the government killed him, the mob killed him. My grandmother always said it was the mob. My dad always said it was the government. And it's probably, little bit of both, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. But so the way I got into it was there was this old TV show that we used to watch, just kind of a curiosity of times gone by, called What's My Line? And What's My Line was a very, it's a game show where, there are four celebrity contestants, and they'll bring on somebody and they'll try to guess through kind of a process of elimination, kind of a 20 questions thing, only I think it was 10 questions, trying to guess the occupation of the people who came on to be contestants. And then at the end of every show, they would end it with a celebrity who had come by. And the thing that is so interesting about watching this show is just how sharp Dorothy Kilgallen is. She would constantly know, if it was a celebrity, she would know who was in town, and just um, as soon as the first question was asked, several times she'd be like, "I can't participate. I know who it is." And when they were guessing, the hoi polloi, what do you do for business? She was always asking the most pertinent questions that the audience would think, what in the world is she talking about? Where is she coming from? What is she trying to divine from this bizarre question? And it would end up being correct. She would just had this uncanny ability to uncover things. Well, one night on the show, What's My Line, which was not her main gig. She was an investigative journalist. She was a reporter for all sorts of New York magazines. Everybody loved having her on. And she announced on the show, this week or tomorrow or tonight or whatever, next week, I'm going to release my piece on the JFK assassination. And I was unable to find the clip easily because it just it seems to have evaded the search engines. But I watched it happen on the show, and then that was the last show she was ever on because she died of alcohol poisoning in her house, not in her own bed, in a spare bedroom. And
sounds like Bruce is back with us.
Can you all hear me?
Yes, sir, Mr. Engelman, we can hear you again. Your
Okay.
video's not yet on, but we can hear you. I was just talking about somebody who is apropos to what we're talking about, but kind of tangentially related. And I wanted to get your take on this. Do you know who Dorothy Kilgallen was?
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up watching What's My Line. I was alive as a baby in the late 50s and a toddler. My mother watched all these game shows, and What's My Line, Password, and What's My Line was one of them. To Tell the Truth was another one. And she was one of the first, as you said, one of the first female investigative reporters in the nation. And she got an interview with Jack Ruby. She came back. She flew to Dallas, interviewed Jack, came back to New York City, and announced, "I'm going to blow this case wide open, and it's nothing what everybody's been told." And she pops up dead all of a sudden. They said it was alcohol poisoning and or suicide. It was neither.
So now here,
oh, Jeffrey,
I mean,
Jeffrey, I say one other thing.
Yes, sir.
There were two female, and that female reporters were rare in those days, very rare. There was another one, Irv Kuppiset, was a columnist for one of the Chicago dailies. I think it was the Sun Times, if not, it was the Trib. And his daughter was investigating it, and she was finding some very information. She was a lot younger than Dorothy. She was like 28, 30, and she popped up dead. There were over 150 eyewitnesses or investigative reporters that died within 3 years of the assassination of mysterious circumstances.
Yeah. And so the story with Dorothy Kilgallen, she died allegedly of alcohol poisoning in a spare bedroom in her house, not under the blankets, in her day clothes, just laying on top of it, as if she had walked in there and passed out. She was known to be a heavy drinker, but there was never a toxicology report. I'm going off of memory here. They just said, "Oh yeah, she drank herself to death. She was known to drink a lot, and that's that." And her family, from what I understand, had quite a bit of difficulty with the law, just trying to just trying to clear up what actually happened, what was going on. Just some very suspicious things going on with that whole situation.
Yes, definitely.
Let's see, where were we before we dropped you? We were talking about your video is still not on, by the way.
Yeah, we've tried everything in the two preceding situations, and doesn't seem to be working this time. We can't.
Okay, well,
I think we'll just go ahead.
We can just go with it
audio
by voice. Yeah,
and maybe
audio
it'll pop
only.
On again by itself too.
Who knows? Who knows?
Kind of did that before.
All right. Well, let's see.
I have a face for radio anyway, so I'm not hurt.
Yeah, the folks at home, you'll have to bear with us. But all right, so we had talked about Trump. He's going to open this up. There was another thing that I don't know what to think of this, and I want your take on this. Now, Alex Jones is a very interesting person. He has said a lot of things that are very hard to believe that fortuitously turned out to be correct. He's also said some things that are absolutely nuts that did not end up being correct. But this year he released a video, and there's a reason I'm very hesitant about this, because in this day and age, audio can be manufactured very, very easily.
AI.
So I'm going to play this clip, but then I would like to hear your take on what's going on here.
Okay.
It's sure good to see you. How's life treating you today? Well, Saul, it's been a pretty touch and go situation. Linda and I have had quite a few unpleasant words here lately over the deal that he hired Mike Wallace to assassinate the president. It's been hectic in every way, but we've lived through it this far. I guess we'll continue to do so. Lyndon should have never issued that order to Mike. But we've had our differences, and I'm a true blue to Lyndon, as I've always been, and tried to carry out every order that he'd ever given me. But this is one I'll probably never be able to forget. And the times that we've had in Texas, and the embarrassment that Lyndon had gotten from Kennedy, I guess there wasn't anything else to do but what he did. Well, you know, Lyndon could have really hit me if he would. Lyndon's the kind of person that doesn't want to help anyone. He's all for Lyndon, and that's the way he's pretty much always been. Well, they had me back.
Can you fellas hear me?
Yeah.
I'm not seeing any. I'm not watching any Alex Jones. It's not coming across my screen.
Oh, okay.
Were you hearing it?
No, I didn't hear it either.
Oh, okay.
And I didn't want to interrupt.
Sean, you were able to hear it just fine?
Yeah. It was two guys having a conversation about it.
All right, so more or less what you've got going on here is Billy Sol Estes and Clifton C. Carter. So from what I understand, that's the head of the Democratic Party at the time, is just in casual conversation. Now, we have no idea how or why this was recorded, but just in casual conversation, him asking, "Hey, man, how are you doing?" And the leader of the Democrat Party says, Lyndon issued the order for us to kill Kennedy. I wish he had never done it, but I'm true blue to Lyndon, but I don't like him. He's just in it for himself. And, he gives quite a bit of context, quite a bit of talking. And this clip allegedly was, this audio was owned by a man. He died. His son came across it in his stuff. And then, the government had access to it, was doing nothing with it, so he went to Alex Jones with it. That's allegedly how it came to light. Have you are you familiar with that clip? Have you heard of it before?
No, I was really looking forward, Jeffrey, to hearing it.
Hmm.
I like Alex Jones. He's not right on everything, but he's also not the crackpot that everybody makes him out to be. He
Mm-hmm.
exposed the Bohemian Grove, which to me is a satanic ritual that if you want to become president, you got to go through the Bohemian Grove, Democrat or Republican, with that political prostitute. I'm trying to think of his name, who served as the campaign manager for every president for the last 20 years. But my son is a motivational speaker out of Los Angeles, California, and he just spoke at Sandy Hook High School next door to where they raised Sandy Hook Elementary. That may not be the name of the high school. And he just spoke to their football team. Those kids are now varsity football players that were there. And because Alex had me convinced that the shooting probably did not take place, as did two Canadian journalists, but it did take place because my son talked to the victims. So, but Alex is right on most things, and I would love to hear that. No, I have not heard about it.
But Sean, the audio is coming through for you just fine.
Yeah, I mean it's not great.
Yeah, it's not
audio,
good quality audio.
Yeah,
but you were able to hear it.
Yeah, I heard it.
Do you want to condense it or summarize it for Jeffrey and I, please, Sean? Or
well, it was two guys talking about basically what Jeff had said was that he was like, "Well, I wish Johnson hadn't given us that order to assassinate the president." Like, I mean, it's pretty it's pretty straightforward. It's like a casual conversation about LBJ giving him the order to kill Kennedy.
Billy Saul Estes was with us on the grassy knoll on the 40th anniversary. My son Jason came over to me. He was about 12 at the time. He goes, Dad, you're never going to believe who's over there on the other end of the grassy knoll by the depository. I said, who? He goes, Billy Saul Estes. So he's been implicated in Henry Marshall's assassination on LBJ's ranch. You can't make this stuff up. Henry Marshall was a Texas state agricultural inspector, an investigator, inspecting a Billy Saul Estes alleged crime on LBJ's ranch. And he popped up dead one day with I think, don't quote me on this, maybe a bullet head to the back of the head, ruled a suicide. And so Billy Saul Estes has been a nefarious figure for years in Texas politics.
I mean, if you just Google his name, after Wikipedia, what you get is New York Times, Billy Saul Estes, Texas con man, dies at 88. Man who swindled Amarillo area, ... Billy Saul Estes has a deal for you, kind of sarcastically from Texas Monthly. Billy Saul Estes dies at 88, notorious Texas con man. So he's not a man well regarded, but he was the one fielding the question to this what was his name again? Clifton Carter, who from if memory serves me correctly, Clifton C. Carter was the person who was the head of the Cliff Carter was the head of the Democrat Party at the time of Kennedy's assassination.
I see.
And so the conversation allegedly between these two, but like we said, in this day and age with audio being so easily forged, it's a hard thing to say that it's definitely these two. If it is even these two, I mean, who living today would be able to listen to that audio and be like, oh yeah, that's Cliff Carter. Oh yeah, that's Billy. That's definitely what he sounded like. It would be a very strange thing to go through so much effort to fake the voice of a voice that's not well known.
Right. Well, they're saying on the internet now, based on this congresswoman from Florida and her initial revelations, that Billy Saul was given orders by LBJ to put Mac Wallace up there in the 6th floor window. Have you heard that?
No, I've not heard that, but
which I don't know if that's even half legitimate.
I want to point out that we are at an hour and 54 minutes.
Yeah,
so I did have some audience questions. If you want.
I think it's time that we should field the audience questions such as we have them.
Let me start with mine. This comes from a friend of mine, Adam Stein. says, is it possible to compose a coherent timeline listing the JFK assassination as initial cause so that the effects and eventualities can be understood more clearly by the American people? So that is the question. There was some follow-up because this was asked on Facebook. My dad chimed in. He says, I suspect one of those downstream effects was George Bush becoming director of the CIA and then president of the United States. So
Yeah,
he's
so
already kind of feeling what you've been putting down. But a coherent timeline listing JFK's assassination as the initial cause so that the effects and eventualities can be understood more clearly by the American people.
Hey, I got one better for your daddy.
Okay.
We actually had a U.S. president get promoted who was overtly involved in the investigation. And that, of course, was Congressman Gerald R. Ford on the Warren Commission. He got to become president. Ironically, when the committee was first launched, Gerald Ford was the only one that didn't believe that Oswald either did it or B, act alone. But I think they got to him finally and said, hey, you want to become president? Just play along. And I liked Gerald Ford a lot. In fact, Gerald Ford made Robert E. Lee's birthday a national holiday. Did you all know that?
I did not.
I did not know that.
I know that he had allowed for Lee to become posthumously an American citizen again because
and
Lee
pardoned him. Yes.
Yeah, he had put in the paperwork to become an American citizen again, but it was kind of pigeonholed, and Gerald Ford made him an American citizen again. So,
so he wasn't all bad.
Yeah. Another question. This one is extremely spicy, and he has a video to go with it if necessary. It is a couple minutes long, so maybe not. But the question is this. This question comes from Sergio Mendoza. Did JFK get killed because he was trying to thwart Mossad's plan on taking a nuke from the USA?
That is a theory that's out there. I do not believe that had any direct involvement at the time. No, sir. That's just my opinion.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting that you do have a lot of Yiddish names floating around the assassination, from Jack Rubenstein to Abraham Zapruder to the very reason that he was in Dallas was he was visiting the Dallas Chamber of Commerce, which was the person in charge of that was someone who was of Jewish origin. So it's only coincidence, and you can only draw inference from coincidence, nothing more. But it is a very interesting set of coincidences.
I heard a lecturer. I was going to say real quick, Jeffrey. I heard a lecturer for an hour and a half on the 50th anniversary. A fellow researcher and Baptist pastor, Wayne Walters, flew down, and his whole thing was the Jewish connection. But I failed to see any real direct, legitimate connection.
I mean, it's tangential at best from what you can see. I mean, the mob seems to be a much stronger connection, and the mob is, has a lot of Jewish people in it, but it's not strictly an ethnically Jewish thing. It just tends to include a lot of people of unsavory character from different walks of life, some of whom happen to be from that walk of life.
Yes, I know another ethnic group that had definite connections and ties to the assassination on November 22nd, and that was a hit team dispatched out of Paris called the French Corsican Assassins. And Rob Reiner, Meathead, remember Meathead from All in the Family? Your parents used to watch that record-breaking sitcom on CBS with Carol O'Connor and Gene Stapleton. Rob played Meathead. He was the son of Carl Reiner. He just did I think a 2-hour special last fall, and he brought out the French connection, that there was a hit team from France there that day as well. That's why I say there were several hit teams there.
There were also a lot of marksmen from Cuba who were in Dallas that day, which is a very strange coincidence again.
Yes.
So one person put it this way, and I'm I don't know who exactly would have said this, but I'm sure many people have said it. It's not so much a question of who had the motive to kill Kennedy as who didn't. Yeah,
Yeah,
there
yeah,
were and that's what we have going on with Trump right now. Trump is a man who's in a lot of danger of being killed because everybody in the deep state hates him because he's for the American people, and the
right.
government is not. The government has not been for the American people since about the mid 1800s for who could figure out what reason.
No, exactly right. And I was asked on John B. Wells, a national program several years ago, when Trump had just gotten in there for the first time, will they try to kill him? I said, it's already in the works. And ironically, I am from the Butler, Pennsylvania area. My dentist,
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Lawrence May, was in Butler. My fraternity brothers were in Butler. It was in between my high school and my college. And I've passed that fairgrounds literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually two ways. If you go with the assassination route over impeachment, and they tried impeachment, that didn't work. The more they prosecute him wrongly and unfairly, the more his popularity goes up. The
Mm-hmm.
other is assassination. So if you don't go with impeachment, you go with assassination, and as last resort. And there's two ways you assassinate. Either you remove his security detail, as they did in Dallas with Kennedy, and they did with Trump and Butler with the Praetorian Guard, or you send in actual hit teams to do the job directly. For instance, the Fort Hood team that was supposed to augment security on November 22nd, 1963 in Dallas, their
Mm-hmm.
intelligence unit was supposed to come up and augment the Secret Service and FBI detail. Oh, and I got a story for you guys. If I have time for one last story.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah.
In between your callers, he was told he did come up. The captain or the colonel did come up, but he was told to stand down. Leave your men back at Fort Hood. Do not get them involved. On a related matter, one of my sources, the Dallas County Sheriff's Department, said that Chief Curry was a shady character. His own family told me he had a drinking problem. He was the police chief that day. He let it spill out later that night on the 22nd that the FBI was aware that Oswald was in Dallas. FBI said they were not aware. Well, they were aware.
Mm-hmm.
Oswald visited Agent Hosty that morning or the day before. But anyway, so the sheriff was an honest lawman and a good cop. Everybody respected Sheriff Decker, who was the Dallas County Sheriff that day. And he was going to put sheriff deputies on the railroad, on the overpass, all around the park at Dealey Plaza. He was paid a visit that morning by a man in a black suit. And he said, I need to talk to the sheriff. And his secretary said, well, who are you? I just need to talk to the sheriff. I'm with the federal government. So she ushered him in to Sheriff Decker's office. And he said to Sheriff Decker, do you like your neighbor's dog? Yeah. Do you like your neighbor? Well, yeah. Would you like to see your neighbors live? Yes. Would you like to see your own children graduate from high school and college? Yes. What is this all about? Because he was tough, man. Sheriff Decker was not only a tough lawman, he was an honest lawman, vice versa. He said, what's this about? He said, well, I understand you're going to have sheriff deputies all over Dealey Plaza to help protect the president and augment the Secret Service detail. He says, that's right. He goes, well, if you want to see your neighbors alive and see your kids graduate from high school and college, I strongly suggest you pull them off the sidewalks. And I walked out.
And how do we have access to this conversation? This is what Sheriff Decker said happened at a later time, or
nobody has access to that. I got that from a secret, private, inside source on the Dallas. The man is still alive. I'm not allowed to give his name out.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And by the way, he's a pastor and a minister now. And a lot of these guys have become pastors. Lieutenant Grammer told me that he got a call. He became a Church of Christ pastor. Usually you can believe most preachers.
One would like to hope. Yeah.
Well, we would like to hope, right? Well, Billy Grammer became a friend of mine. He was in, I was tipped that he'd taken a call from Ruby on Saturday night saying, hey, Grammer, because Ruby hung out at the police department all the time. And he was there in and out all weekend long. And Grammer, who is this? You know who it is. And he said, I knew it was Jack. He just left. Well, I know about your secret plan to transfer Oswald from the county jail or the city jail to the county jail tomorrow morning. He said, I also know about your plan to use an armored car as a decoy. And Billy told me, Lieutenant Grammer at the time, he said, Bruce, chills went up and down my spine because only 7 people in the whole world knew about that top secret plan. And Chief Curry, he's a Governor Connolly who's already recovering. He was conscious. They told him about it. President Johnson, J. Edgar Hoover, Captain Will of the Homicide and Robbery Division of the Dallas PD, Chief Curry, and myself, and the head of the Secret Service. That was it. Top secret. And here's Jack Rubenstein explaining it in vivid detail the night before. And he said, well, what do you want me to do about it, Jack? He said, I didn't tell you I know you're Jack Ruby. He said, Jack, what do you want me to do about it? He said, well, I suggest you change your plans tomorrow because he's going to be rubbed out if you don't.
And then Jack was the one who did it.
Yeah. Hello.
Yeah. Very strange. Yeah. Very strange indeed. Also very fortuitous for him. All of his bills got paid, and he had an illness that was going to kill him anyway. He died not much later, and he got very well taken care of, and his people got taken care of for the chore of having taken out, Lee Harvey Oswald.
Absolutely. He was having financial problems at his downtown burlesque club in Dallas, the Carousel Club. And he also owed money to the Chicago mob, who had placed him in Dallas as the number 3 man in the Metroplex. Joseph Savella was the key godfather. And another gentleman who I will not announce on this broadcast was the underling and the godfather of Dallas. Savella was more Fort Worth. And I got to win his grandson to Jesus Christ. But his grandfather was the head mobster in Dallas.
Yep.
Oh, by the way, where Ruby ate his last meal at this fella's restaurant.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the night before he had a steak dinner on Thursday night at my friend's restaurant in Dallas.
All right. Well, the audience questions have not come through for me. I don't know if people are just blown away by all the information, or if they're just holding their tongue because they don't want to.
I did have one
get rubbed out.
I did have one sent to me. Why? And the question is, why oil people? I think that's referring to earlier when we were talking about all the people in the George H.W. Bush kind of circle, and like why would oil people want JFK assassinated?
Oh, that's a great question. Big Steel also wanted him dead because he was threatening steel in Pittsburgh and Youngstown and Detroit. And the oil people were conservative. And even though we now know that JFK was to the right of Ronald Reagan on many issues, if he were alive today, and every historian I've talked to that liberal and conservative that knew JFK agrees with me. If JFK, I think JFK is proud of his nephew, even though the rest of the family has disowned him because they're all a bunch of communists and socialists and ultra liberals. JFK was to the right of Ronald Reagan. I mean, he was for tax cuts. He was for the space program. He was for beating the Ruskies. He was against quotas and affirmative action. For a Democrat at 63, JFK, but he was viewed as a liberal. And the oil community didn't like him. In fact, he had posters all over Dallas that day, wanted for treason. And they made it look like a double mugshot of Kennedy. And those were on utility poles and telephone poles all over Dallas. And, we could spend 2 hours on the oil connection. I would ask people to go and somehow get a bootleg copy of Executive Action with the other Gere who played on the grandfather on Walton's, and Burt Lancaster and Robert Ryan. An excellent movie, way ahead of its time. It shows you how the oil connection and why the oil connection was involved. Or read Jim Marr's book, Crossfire. He deals with that subject.
Okay. Yeah, it looks like the movie Executive Action is actually available on YouTube. It's behind a paywall, so there might be, if you sail the 7 seas, there might be a way of getting your hands on it in a more economically fun method. But speaking of spending money on things, I had one more page to share. This here on eBay right now is The Eternal Flame by Bruce Engelman, a signed edition. Somebody
I
is
did
selling
see
it
that.
for $35, and it's in one person's cart already. I would not try to make an offer. Don't try to low bid this guy. If he had it on a if he had it on an auction right now, I bet it would be our little audience would be bidding all against each other to get this signed copy of The Eternal Flame. Right here it says, to Dr. John and Emma, there are no finer two people on the face of God's green earth. Keep serving Jesus always. So I have a feeling you know who that was that you signed that for. But
I don't. I did a national book tour, and I was in many, many churches. And,
oh, is that right?
yes, sir.
Well, some Dr. John and Emma in '04, you signed their book for them, and judging by the timeline, more than likely what's happened is Dr. John, whoever he was, is probably passed on, and his
Yeah.
estate. They don't hold on to the good books; they're selling those on eBay. So, but if you want to come out ahead, my fine audience, my fine people, if you want to take advantage of someone else's carelessness, come get this book, and that will you will have a signed edition for only $35. But
Is it
if
on eBay
people,
or? Excuse me for interrupting, Jeffrey. Is it
uh-huh,
on? Is it on eBay or Amazon?
this is on eBay.
Okay.
Now, if people want to get a new version of your book, how would they go about that? And tell us what's coming up for you.
Yeah, sir. Very, very good question. And by the way, I've seen it go. If you have a first edition autographed, I've seen it go as high as $300 per copy on eBay and Amazon in the past. If it's in excellent condition. Right now, we are getting ready to republish Eternal Flame with a few updates, and then come out with the sequel, Eternal Frame, how Oswald was framed. A little play on words there. The Eternal Flame
Mm-hmm.
was the torch on Kennedy's grave. And we'll be setting up a website, and there it is. There it is. Yeah.
There it is. Yep,
And
The Eternal Flame by Bruce Engelman.
Dr.
Yep,
John and
this is Dr. John and Emma in '04. And there's a very handsome, much younger Bruce Edward Engelman there on the back.
yeah.
And it's a sharp looking book.
Thank you, sir.
Illustrations on the inside, look at that. Look at that.
Thank
So
you.
when should we expect this new edition to be available?
I cannot give you a timetable. I'm working on it daily, and we're going to accelerate it in light of President Trump opening up some of the files.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I've been able to speak to both
you-
Kiwanis clubs here in Brown County. I'm in demand all of a sudden.
Can you say what publisher will be putting it out? Or
It'll more than likely it'll be self-published, because when you hire a publisher, they will edit certain things out, and you sign away your control. This one was self-published, and because of my background in public relations and broadcasting, I worked for 3 TV networks. I was able to, and about 8 radio stations. I was able to do a national tour on my own, and it worked very well. And the book sold well. It was an unofficial bestseller, not on the New York Times. And the other thing is, mine is out of 380 books or so, give or take 20, about 350, 380 books on the JFK assassination. Mine is the only book that is a so-called Christian book. And I purposely put a Bible plan of salvation in the back so people would know how to go to the Bible, receive Jesus Christ as their personal Savior. Many people have. It's a great gift for Roman Catholics who love Kennedy, who've never made a personal decision to follow Christ or receive Christ. If you go with a publisher, they're going to take that out. Even Zondervan would take that out, and they're supposed to be called Rupert Murdoch.
Zondervan are supposed to be Christian, but they haven't been for a long time.
Did you hear about Rupert Murdoch, guys? Did you hear about Rupert Murdoch?
No. What's the deal with that?
Yeah, he has given orders to the administrative staff of Fox News. He wants them to go ultra liberal. He doesn't want them to be conservative or fair and balanced anymore. Well, we've seen Fox going liberal very much for the last 10 years.
Yeah, well, they've been controlled opposition for a very long time.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, If people want to follow you, do you have a website, or are you on Twitter or Facebook? Where can people find you, or should they just Google your name every so often and
Yeah,
hope to see this book come up?
Bruce Engelman 37 at gmail.com, and we are working on a website to come out in conjunction with the book. So
All right.
no official website for Engelman Publications or the book itself, but again, it's Bruce Engelman, all small case, BruceEngelman 37 at G as in Gary, gmail.com.
All right. All right. Well, folks, if y'all are interested in that book, hang tight. I'm sure, Mr. Engelman, when that book gets published, we'd love to have you back. And hopefully a lot of eyes get on this stream. A lot of people, a lot of people have a lot of questions about what happened that day in Dallas, and
Yes.
with good reason, because it was very suspicious, and the entire thing was a cover-up from the very beginning of that day to the very end of that administration. There was just a lot of covering up going on. So, well, Mr. Engelman, I know that we don't have you on the screen, but I do want to say thank you very much for stopping by, and we appreciate the work that you've done in this book. I'm going to get my hands on a copy of it for sure, and definitely on the follow-up book as well.
Thank you.
I really have a lot of admiration for the people who have taken the time to sit down and make a thorough, studious understanding of what actually happened, because it's very easy to write something off and say, oh, well, nobody knows. And it's also a lot of fun to just kind of make stuff up as you go along and be like, well, the Russians with all of their Spetsnaz snipers, and you can come up with fanciful stories. But the truth is a lot harder to get your hands on, and it takes work to dig up the sources, to talk to the people. So I appreciate you for taking the time and recording that for people like us who have some curiosity about our history, where we came from, what happened to get us where we are now. Sean, any last words?
Just thank you for everything you do.
Thank you.
If anyone is in the Fort Worth area and you are looking to join the Sons of Confederate Veterans, we have our camp, and you can reach out to either one of us, and we'd love to have you.
One of the best camps in Texas, right?
Absolutely.
Yes. And
fantastic.
Just one comment, and I'll bid you guys farewell. Thank you so much for the honor. It's been my pleasure, and I'll be glad to come back on anytime you guys see fit or have the interest. And that is, it took me 10 years to write my book. I read a lot of books about the Kennedy assassination that were written in libraries, and I'm not totally opposed to that. But 95 to 98% of my research in my book was done firsthand. I made trips to New Orleans. I would go to Washington, D.C. I flew to Dallas. I was still living up north in Columbus, Ohio at the time. And so I interviewed the suspects. I've interviewed the alleged perpetrators. I've interviewed the law enforcement people, the guy that you see Oswald cuffed to. I've talked to him on the phone. And of course, he just passed away, the guy in the cream-colored suit and the cowboy hat. And so it's all firsthand research, even especially the Rose Jeremy murder case that I broke. So it's been a blessing, and God's been good. And again, thank you for having me on, fellas.
Well, thank you for coming.
Yeah,
It's been an absolute joy.
I want to thank my director and producer, Mrs. Cassandra Engelman, tonight.
All right. Mrs. Engelman, thank you for waiting in the wings and being there for us, being the tech support when things fell apart.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right. All right. Well, everybody, thank you for coming along. Those of you who have stuck with this longer stream than usual, we appreciate you sticking around until the end. And for those who are watching after the fact, I hope you're having a wonderful work week. Don't let this get you depressed. Yes, there are evil men in the world who can kill good people, and they can do a lot of bad things. But at the end of the day, the Lord in heaven, he looks down and he laughs. He will have them all in derision. And sometimes he does that with little podcasts and with little known authors writing books that blow the lid off the whole thing. So Whatever it is that you're doing, it is not so small that God doesn't care about it. So take to heart, don't be depressed by where we are, but be encouraged that God can use you to do great things. I hope
Amen.
you have a wonderful rest of your holy day, and God bless.